Mark, really appreciate the time today and really appreciate the opportunity to sit down together. The conversation that we're going to have today as part of the Strategy Unscripted podcast is slightly different, I would say, to the most common conversations we have here, in that we're going to look at strategy through the lens, through a prism of brand strategy, marketing, and how that fits in the wider strategic planning process.
Brilliant, excellent.
But very excited to chat together.
Brilliant. Thanks for inviting me.
No, absolutely. To begin with then, really good if you can just introduce yourself a little bit and talk through some of your background and also some of the work that you've been involved in.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, certainly. So I had a first taste of strategy, or more specifically, account planning at one of the few ad agencies that anyone's ever heard of, called Saatchi & Saatchi, before I started university. And I knew I wanted to go down this route, but really explored this world of account planning, which was taking a strategic process to the creative world and therefore influencing brands and kind of doing the fun side of business. So that led me on a sort of university and through the tech world into the world of advertising and brand management, so across marketing agencies. And across my career, I've worked at the 6 big holding co's. I've worked for agencies between them, and I've worked for various independents and brand consultancies and management consultancies. So I've had an experience that involves working with brands that's on the agency roster, but then I've also been able to be working in-house where I had the opportunity to influence the decision makers who sit within, and then everything in between. So I've been running for the last 10 years or so a kind of a micro consultancy called Strategy Stone that involves me working with different agencies and brands in order to inform their advertising, marketing and brand strategy.
And within that, if you were to try to summarize in just a couple of sentences your key skill set or what you bring to the table across those large-scale advertising companies as well as the agencies that you work with, what would that look like?
So it's a combination of kind of fundamental core business, brand management and marketing management skills. We're talking kind of traditional, 4 Ps of marketing, Philip Kotler, through the various frameworks and understandings that have been pulled in by various marketing writers, speakers, brand experts, the skills of management consulting when it comes to brands, and then also the world of the advertising account planner, which is really a kind of an evolving document idea that was first written in I think in the 70s, which led this sort of process of the accounts, the approach to brand advertising that takes place through something called account planning, which is really a kind of a fundamental strategic approach of where are we, where do we need to get to, how do we get there, and taking the fundamental customer insight into informing what the brand does, whether it's evolving the brand, transformation, or a campaign. So those skills that I've picked up across different sectors and industries means I get to apply the learnings from one sector over to another. So I've got that kind of outsider approach, which means I can apply things that generally aren't known within any given sectors, because most people I'm working with tend to have worked in one sector for a long period of time, therefore don't have that kind of diverse knowledge of different techniques, tools and frameworks, which I like to bring and apply to the work that I do.
And ostensibly here for myself and also for the organisation, we work in, not traditional, but we work in the world, the ecosystem of business strategy.
Yeah.
Typically with large, complex organisations, distributed businesses. And in a lot of those conversations, a lot of people that I speak with, I believe they often see brand strategy as sitting outside of that ecosystem. Now, yes. I don't necessarily look at it in the same way. I imagine you don't.
Yeah.
But what's your view of that?
Yeah, it's absolutely fundamental to bring up. So the more I've been in the industry, the more upstream I've got. So I've got the kind of practical skills of the day-to-day elements, and then I've also got the upstream strategic view where I'm taking a view on the business. So one of the frameworks I use is cascade goals, which is a model which is like, what's the ultimate business objective? What's the strategic objectives? What are the campaigns, the media, creative goals that feed into that? And everything goes up to inform that larger piece, which ultimately is the business success. And that business success also sits with the wider kind of traditional strategic planning outside of the world of brands and advertising, where that's involved in operational excellence. It's about efficiency. It's about the sort of enterprise challenges to do with things like supply chains, logistics, finance, and the kind of the whole operations. So these two things do sometimes come together, and sometimes there's an opportunity to make them better and utilize the power of the brand, because a brand aware business is a successful business. So, and that applies to all different parts of the organization.
What do you mean by a brand aware business, sorry?
So many large businesses, traditional businesses, particularly kind of older businesses that may have been around for a long time, that have some heritage and legacy, they tend to be, some of them are either too reliant on their brand because they were once known for doing something successful, but they've probably got a lot of competitors that they're up against, some disruptor brands, some direct-to-consumer brands, some new entrants to the market, maybe a pivot from an unexpected pivot from another business. All of those things are kind of part of the mix. So the challenge is a brand-aware business understand the value, for example, of finance isn't just kind of a cost center, it's an opportunity to inform the pricing strategy, which might inform a larger share of market. A brand aware business will realize that employees, rather than as a cost and a core function that you have to do, they could be seen as an asset. They might be able to create content. You could have an employee retention, an employee engagement scheme or system that might be interesting to kind of take advantage of being a brand aware business and the value of the employer brand that comes through to the retention and hiring of staff and keeping them engaged whilst they're there. So an example of that was me working with DHL, who are the most international business in the world. So they're in more places than Coca-Cola. They're not necessarily a brand you would first think of, but based on having operations in every market, the ability to reach these kind of more remote places where there's only a few people working and these people aren't connected with each other, in an office environment, which is quite typical for offices, for organizations, you might find that those type of businesses, the way they operate, they require something. So working on a employee engagement program, which I believe is the largest in the world that I was working with, for them was an example of them recognizing the importance of their brand in terms of being a brand aware business and making that part of the employer brand. And you can apply it to all the other kind of functions of a business, whether it's finance, logistics, operations, sales. You can apply a level of brand to each element, and effectively what I'm saying by brand is a unique, differentiated, distinctive set of principles that help guide and elevate any element of the business. So you're not just running dry and generic, you're bringing some of the character of the business's brand as part of all of those elements of the business.
And when you're brought in, or when you start a piece of work with the DHL or Diageo, MasterCard and others that you've worked with, what are typically the big challenges, the big pain points that an organization or teams within that organization are trying to overcome? Why are you involved? What are you bringing to the table?
So normally there's the reason why I'm pulled in is because of my experience with tricky businesses, regulated businesses, complex businesses that are seemingly successful, and one might expect for these type of businesses not to require this at all because people know who these brands are, or they're not really a brand that advertises or focuses on their brand. But actually, all these businesses have a lot of operations behind the scenes that are sometimes going to their business-to-business customers, or the B2B2C type customers. So there's a lot of behind the scenes work that needs to happen to reach their goals and their success. So they'll often work with an agency or a consultancy, and they'll have a defined brief, challenge, and budget. However, the challenges arrive with both the budgets, because it can often be restrictive. Sometimes it means that you can use that creative constraint of a budget in order to do something quite clever, quite scrappy and successful. But due to the scale of these organizations we're talking about, that's often sometimes not possible. So there's often a lot of test and learn, pilot programs using a test market to see if you can sort of shift the needle on certain things, and also using trends. So the budget is the first challenge, which sometimes opens opportunities and then sometimes crushes them. And the second biggest challenge is around team silos. So businesses that come to you or come to an agency where I might get pulled in, and those agencies, those businesses are, there's a department that's been given a certain budget. There's a stakeholder, there's a partner, there's somebody involved who might be coming forward to say, this is what I need to achieve. However, they might not be aligned with the other business units that even they may even sit in the same place. They might be physically in the same place, but it's it's probably the most common challenge of businesses not being aligned across different units, therefore creating sort of silos that only when you dig into the work, you kick off the workshops and you start to find there is a disparity between knowledge sharing, best practice, finding out that another kind of part of the business, whether it's a different country or a different part of the business unit at the same location, they could be going off in different directions. They might even be running the same pieces of work. So that's often a challenge in terms of helping them overcome that situation and navigating the silos, but also it's often a hold up that might stop the success of a business. And I would advise that any businesses that are engaging in some kind of strategic work to make sure that they're internally aligned and to make sure that people are aware of various projects. You might even start off with using a RACI kind of model of making sure that people are responsible, accountable, consulted or informed, and that would be a good measure to make sure that any projects that are happening, you get to find out as early as possible that these things are happening simultaneously, rather than later and finding out that there is a kind of a misalignment internally. However, if you are together and you do come forward with kind of a plan and understanding, then you've got more success of being able to achieve a kind of an integrated, aligned approach.
Mm-hmm. What are the overriding goals that you're trying to build? Because when we think about corporate strategy, or we go down into business unit level, we often think about developing clarity, developing accountability, and developing at least an understanding of the impact that the strategy is having on the business. Is it similar for you through the brand lens?
Through the brand lens, what you're ultimately looking to do is to create value around your brand and utilize that as a moat in terms of a successful strategy. You also leverage that in order to grow your business. So grow your business presence. It might be expertise. You might be using it strategically to be known for a certain thing in the industry. I've recently worked with a lot of pharmaceutical brands, some of the big pharma brands, and the sort of the smaller, more niche brands, and they all have a job sometimes in just being known in a certain area, and that's a primary goal that is both from a business perspective and a sort of a classic strategic planning process, but also from a brand perspective, that the brand needs to be associated with that. Other brands that are doing sort of campaigns of some kind in order to grow the business and to create the awareness and to drive new growth, new customers, loyalty, all of those type of things. Those are also absolutely crucial for the brand enabling you to do that, because by creating a brand with different distinctive assets and building availability, mental availability, physical availability, and the other techniques that are outlined in Professor Byron Sharp, How Brands Grow, would be one example of where the importance of a brand in terms of informing a scientific approach to the business can be leveraged. So what's quite interesting actually about that particular book is that it seems to have crossed outside of the world of sort of the advertising marketing community, and it's kind of gone into lots of other areas of kind of business strategy, organizational understanding, because there's really a kind of a scientific approach. However, when it does come to brands, the real challenge is that balance between emotional versus rational, heads versus heart, and being able to strike a balance of suggesting that the brand is a very important asset, which is why I talk about brand aware businesses, and taking a unified integrated approach is far better for creating success that isn't just about internal strategic planning, organizational and operational. This is more about how do you leverage these assets that you create that actually deliver brand value. And brand value gets delivered to the customer, but it also builds the business itself. So a strategic plan to grow the business will grow your own brand valuation. There's different brand valuation indexes and methodologies, whether it's a relevance index or a credibility index, or even a standard brand valuation index. So the Omnicom brand consultancy, Interbrand, runs a brand valuation methodology which involves econometrics and other techniques that's kind of built up to work out what is the value of that brand. Now, you often find that consumer brands are a lot bigger, but there are a lot of business brands that play in this space as well. And it's within any given business's interest to understand what brand valuation is in order to create the maximum amount of your brand value. And that's not just about operational income, revenues. It's not about that. It's about the broad package, about how much the brand is worth rather than how much money they're generating. And that often gives a sign towards brand health to have a successful plan that runs multiple years. And this is why it's important for the strategic planning processes, because traditional strategic plan processes run in yearly cycles. They have a 5-year plan, 3-year plan, and they're all kind of run in that way. Whereas actually a lot of brand strategies are kind of more episodic, which means that there is something that triggers some change in the market with the customer, within the market, maybe a regulatory change that means we need to change what we're doing in order to create a strategic plan now, which is based on our original sort of guiding principles, and move it forward to what do we need to move next. So that type of strategic planning is really where you sort of cross over with the kind of Richard Rumelt's good strategy, bad strategy concepts, in which in his book he kind of really talks at that, to me, the juncture of the world of brand strategy and marketing, and kind of talking about campaigns and growth. And at the same time, he's talking about the let's call it proper strategy, whether it's organizational, operational, and also using the kind of military and other traditional type of strategic techniques together. So I think that that type of credibility and that thinking works well in the middle to be able to kind of reach both sides, whether it's brand and outside.
No, certainly. And do you have any specific examples where the development and implementation of really good, effective brand strategy has directly influenced frontline behavior or the culture within a business?
The DHL actually example earlier with a different part of the business was working with their SME work, recognizing the importance of SMEs against the enterprise clients that have traditionally driven revenue, but also specifically looking at the opportunities of e-commerce. So the global e-commerce has been booming, but in very different ways in different markets. So the ability to understand what was going on in that space and be able to change a culture around acknowledging this important part of the market was a crucial step in being able to create content and to create campaigns and strategies in order to drive a very kind of modern approach. So almost moving away from the traditional big businesses that have, and the large enterprise multinationals that have been so crucial to the business, but actually looking at where are the growth opportunities and therefore serving new spaces. So being involved in the culture and move into the world of whether it's e-commerce, direct-to-consumer brands, and really embracing businesses that traditionally weren't necessarily part of what they're doing. So one example of a brand that we worked very closely with was the success of Gymshark. So a brand that started off really with not much strategy and with a lot of luck, but with a very specific approach to how that they would work with influencers, products, and understood how to sort of permeate culture. And that happened at an unprecedented scale. So the ability to kind of work with businesses that were so high growth that generally don't start with too much of a strategy, with a lot of not much experience or maturity in terms of doing things properly, but being able to have the success which later led to, okay, this is what we need to do now. So that kind of role of being able to support a business in a kind of a B2B perspective, I think is a really important part of the story. And I think from my perspective as well, as a kind of consultant, freelancer, working on various different teams, is your job is to kind of handhold a little bit and to give support and advisory in order to say this is the right direction of where you want to go, but you need to fully embrace the direction you're going in. You can't just do a half attempt towards something you want to do. You need to get into the world of the audience that you're trying to reach. I did that similarly with Google, with the Google for Work, G Suite world, the way to sort of work with them. And it was quite interesting because they started off as effectively a challenger brand. They're still effectively, against the might of Microsoft, they still act as a challenger brand. But the ability to give them success, to take them in to kind of a new world of growth, was around recognizing how you can change culture, whether it's remote working, people using their own devices, how human resources have an impact on this, as well as the sort of IT sort of implementation, as well as users. So it's quite interesting from an example like Google, because they were utilizing their own culture of developing a kind of remote tools, office type environment setup, but utilize their own culture in sort of looking at the opportunity and recognizing that being involved in the SME community, involved in various sectors that were quite happy to embrace this, but also recognizing the more difficult, challenging sectors that weren't ready to embrace it, such as legal and finance, were quite adverse for taking a company that wasn't necessarily seen as enterprise industry grade. So from a cultural perspective, it's sometimes interesting to see those two examples of DHL getting into a new culture from enabling success versus the likes of Google, who basically created products and then were pushing them out as an example of getting their own kind of free, modern, sort of open culture throughout their products and therefore throughout their customers. And that's an important of where kind of the brand, service, product come together, that it's about the brand going out to market and being successful there.
We've spoken in this conversation about some fantastic brands that you've worked with. What have been some of the most challenging instances? Again, nothing confidential, but the biggest challenges that you've come up against, that you've seen within organizations when it comes to building and executing the brand strategy?
Yeah. Okay, great question. The phrase swim lanes has come up before. So being able to be assigned your role of either, for example, an agency, these are your capabilities, this is what you're delivering, whether it's against budgets or otherwise, being able to be kept in your swim lanes is something that comes up for a variety of different organizations. And sometimes they do it incredibly well. So working with Kellogg's and Kellogg's Europe, the way that they run things is that there is a little bit of crossover between the different capabilities and services by sort of industry partners. Diageo do it incredibly well, that they make sure that all the different parts work together, and that enables a kind of integrated, unified different approaches. But sometimes those swim lanes are treated very hard and actually cause a lot of pain and difficulty for the agencies. And these are big brands we're talking about who keep a very tight ship in the way that they're working, because you will often find, because these brands are so big, there are some challenges around what can be done. So for example, Disney are an organization who keep very much control of keeping all of their vendors, providers, the people working on different parts of strategy, keeping them separate, but they will orchestrate it themselves, which sometimes causes a bit of a challenge in terms of working. there is almost a great outcome overall. So actually the experience of working with them might feel quite challenging, but actually the success that they have is often based on that control approach. Certainly when I was working with them through agencies, there was there was a lot of remuneration that was almost based on the savings of money and the reduction of being able to do things, and that sometimes kind of slightly shifted things that you'd be able to do. Also with Nike or Nike, depending on where you are, the organization is incredibly successful, but there are so many people prepared to just massively over deliver in order to say that we have worked with Nike. So that can be a bit of a challenge, because actually when you're working with them, there'll be kind of restrictions of do not do this and do not do this, even though there is often some challenges about what gets delivered. But actually in terms of being able to deliver those pieces of work, it's often quite difficult, because there's a kind of an expectation that everyone else is trying so hard to deliver. So particularly in a kind of a pitch situation, there is a kind of a massive over delivery of type of work that could be done, rather than a sensible amount that might be done for other clients. So there's a kind of, there's a recognition.
It's a flip side of the power of brand, though.
Absolutely.
The power of their brand is so strong, and just the mere association with it is so powerful for an organization, whether it's a consulting firm, whether it's an agency, that you just want to get close to them and you want to be associated with them.
Yeah, it's a badge of honor. So Nike, Disney, and there's some other organizations in that kind of similar space, Lego as well, incredibly successful. But you find that some of these brands are just kind of generating success based on the keenness of both agencies, but also the world of kind of education. So I'm also a lecturer. I do a number of different courses at universities in the UK, and there's a lot of students who are keen to work with those sort of badge brands who have credibility, who are well known. So there's almost an over delivery against these very strong businesses who of course got the power of getting a brand right, which is kind of a bit of a lesson for the smaller businesses. But you'll often find that particularly in B2B, they're less interested in the big consumer brands that have so much power. But the difference between the two is absolutely huge. And
you've worked across this industry for quite a while now, and as we said, with many different organizations and with different agencies as well. What are some of the big changes that are occurring within the industry and the ways in which organizations build and implement brand strategy? And what are some of the big, maybe external influences that are changing the way in which this is done?
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff been going on. The industry is a constant evolution. It's probably one of the fastest moving industries in terms of responding to the speed of culture, the importance of the influence of the new, rather that is then deemed as important, but actually it's about the balance of the classic principles, the brilliant basics, versus the kind of whatever comes in that's new. Now, the industry in terms of brand management, consulting, advertising, marketing, basically has been reduced and under a lot of pressure over the last 15 years as digital started to take over from the traditional kind of Mad Men advertising world. And I was involved at one of the big Mad Men agencies at the start of my career, at the point where I was one of the first people to be involved in kind of digital. This is Facebook, this is what you need to know. I remember an email sending out to various colleagues, and nobody knew what it was. This is the importance of what YouTube are doing with their new features. And later throughout my career, I've been able to kind of document where there's this switch over to digital. Now, a lot of what digital offers is promise, but it's also switched over from being more of a art and taking a chance, like sort of almost like creating a one-hit wonder pop song. You can't quite exactly work it out, but the influence on digital has sped up to such a speed that things have been automated, things like programmatic advertising, overall trends of the influence on digital on the visual aesthetic of brands. whether it's, for example, in the luxury industry,
Yes.
most brands with lots of heritage, even around their kind of logo and visual identity, have all been flattened. Colours have been removed.
You see that significantly across. I mean, always see it coming up on Twitter with these viral posts where you see a number of different brands, whether it's in luxury and tech and whatever it may be.
Every brand. So being flat, so every brand is different, and every brand sort of almost becomes the same. This evolution, I'm not sure where it's going to go next, but effectively the brands are occupying a digital space and they're all trying to compete in the world of digital, and that involves film, audio, search results, appearing within culture, appearing within expensive media, whatever that might be, but there is still an allure of putting your brand out there in a certain space. However, the impact of where digital has gone has been massively taken over with the impact of AI on the industry. And I've worked recently within a WPP agency where who've done the biggest investment within an AI marketing operating system, and they've put a lot of effort in towards that, a lot of investment that pushes towards utilizing these things. Now, I've seen some good results, but also I've seen some very mediocre results that have sort of been generated from using these systems.
Yeah.
And it's about who's using them rather than actually the tools themselves.
Like with anything, you put rubbish in one end, you'll get rubbish at the other end still.
True, but there is now more powerful ability to almost get things right. So what you've seen is other companies use very similar systems. So some of those people are actually putting in rubbish and getting gold out, but you've still got people starting to use the same tools as they get cheaper, as the sort of the commodification of AI tools.
The availability of them, which is...
The availability and the power creeps up, and it sort of keeps on going. So there is a little bit of a race to the bottom fact come in. Also, with the coinciding challenges of the socio-political world, which cause pressure on different businesses and tariffs and things that cause a number of different issues in terms of how your business works. And then there is a recognition, well, if you've got less money and you've got all these AI tools and they're available to the clients as well as the agencies, then can't we do stuff ourselves? Yeah. So what you've seen is this effect of people taking it upon themselves to use the tools to make stuff. And some of that stuff might not be very good, but actually some of the content that might produce, a basic digital campaign, it might be okay, and you've got the tools to kind of guide you. So people are using various AI platforms as a way to create cheap. They might be seeing it as effective and efficient, but actually variable standards about what outputs they get. Some businesses do it better than others, but the impact of clients doing AI themselves, agencies just getting behind AI to do it as well, is a very challenging thing to do at the same time where there's been a lot of juniorization across different areas of kind of marketing services, brand management, where there is a kind of a higher tier that is slowly kind of disappearing against the kind of more junior people who might not necessarily have the fundamental skills about brand building campaigns, successful understanding about business commercial worlds. And without that knowledge and just understanding about how to use the tools, which is obviously particularly within generative AI, it's about creating, kind of a combined averagized version of whatever they're creating. It creates a bit of a flow. There's a kind of a cycle in motion where there are less capable people with the fundamental skills using tools which are really easy to put stuff out. So overall, the standard goes a bit down and they're seeing less value. And the only other challenge against the industry is back to strategy, is that in this world that the strategists are using these tools as well as the creators, or the analyzers and trend predictors, all of these tools are being used across different areas of the strategic world. But the challenge is, if these tools are so available, where is the value in creation, which puts strain on the industry, and also what is the value on strategy, which kind of comes back to the sort of fundamental point is, how do you do things properly if the idea of brand strategy is challenged because those who have access to tools think, well, I've got the tools, therefore I can do a better job, or the job of goals, KPIs might be seen as the strategy, or the hope to be the number one in the market is the strategy, where actually it's not. It's a combination of these things. So I'm very I'm very keen on promoting kind of best, brilliant basics, good hygiene in terms of brand management, recognizing that you should have a unified, integrated business to make all different components work together. You need to understand what your market you're playing is, and if you're diversifying, you need to map that out in terms of where you can go next. But I think the ability to apply the sort of the classic principles is going to be even more important as those principles are ignored in the favour of kind of quick, fast results.
So, Mark, just to finish up, I want to put you in a potentially a slightly challenging scenario, but I'm sure it isn't anything that you're not used to. But if I was sat here as a business leader of a large organisation, and I was asking you to explain to me in 90 seconds, what are some of the core concepts, the core tactics I can use to build and execute brand strategy, what would that be?
Okay, so first up, you could take your cascade goals, look at what your business goals are, how does brand strategy fit in, how does creative fit in, what are we doing in the business, and make sure it ladders up to whatever ultimately your business wants to do. So you're bridging those two. Then you want to understand about where your brand is positioned in the market against your current customers, ex-lapsed customers, and potential future perfect customers. What do they look like? Speak to them, find out, try and get as much feedback as you can. And as well as doing that, you want to work out how they position yourselves in the market. So you want to speak with internal people who are key stakeholders and those customers to find out who are the players. Are they the same competitors that you would think are obvious, or are there some others? And what you want to do is to get that list and look at their overall presentation of what they say and what they look like by printing out marketing communications, what their website looks like, what these businesses, how they present themselves. And if you just put those up onto a wall and do a short session involving your key team to work out what is the difference, where is the status quo, where are people saying exactly the same, what is the difference, how does our brand appear, and what do we do either visually already, or what could we do that we're capable of that means that we could take on these competitors by having something that's different and distinctive. So the differentiated assets, the distinctive assets, that's something you need to take stock of, and you want to show those and talk about those with your customers, whether they're future customers, ex-customers, to be able to understand, what do you like about our business, what's interesting, what are your needs, and therefore how can our brand deliver against that. So you make sure that the future of your brand is dictated by your customers first, but also recognizing who are the players in the market, and you want to make sure that you do not look or sound like them. You want to have your own distinctive tone of voice, and that is a recipe for success.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, look, really appreciate the time today. Really interesting conversation and hugely insightful to discuss a different lens, a different prism of the world of strategy. So once again, thank you very much. Appreciate the time and look forward to speaking further soon.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ben.
Cheers.
Thank you.